My name is Renata Stowe, and I was 41 years old the afternoon my neighbor knocked on my door holding a small boy by the hand. The boy's name was Marcus. He was 10. He was wearing shoes 2 sizes too small and a jacket with a broken zipper in November. Mrs. Pruitt from next door said she'd found him sitting on the curb outside our building for the second time that week, alone after school, saying he wasn't allowed back inside until 6. He was my nephew. He lived 4 floors above me in the same building. And I had no idea any of this was happening. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family choices and quiet courage outlasts cruelty. If stories about standing up for the ones who can't stand up for themselves are why you're here, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I need to tell you something about myself before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a dramatic person. I am a licensed property assessor for a mid-sized county office in Delwood, Virginia. I spend my days reading square footage, checking zoning records, cross-referencing deed filings, and finding the one line in a legal description that doesn't match the 3 lines above it. My colleagues call me the paper trail because I have never once solved a problem by raising my voice, and I have never once failed to solve one by following the documents. My sister Claudine used to say I was born 40 years old and already annoyed at sloppy record-keeping. She said it like a joke. She wasn't entirely wrong. Claudine died 19 months before Mrs. Pruitt brought Marcus to my door. Car accident on a wet road outside Roanoke. She was 38. She left behind 1 son, 1 storage unit of furniture, a small life insurance policy, and a sister who lived 4 floors below and somehow knew none of what was happening in the apartment upstairs. That is the part one have to carry, and I'll tell you plainly, I carry it. After Claudine died, her son Marcus went to live with our Aunt Bettina. Not to me. Tina had pushed for it hard and fast in the weeks after the funeral, before any of us had stopped crying long enough to think clearly. She was family, she said. She had space, she said. She had retired early from a school administrative job and had nothing but time. The social worker who filed the initial placement report had noted it as appropriate. Bettina was 61, stable income, suitable residence. Marcus moved in with his winter coat and his backpack and his Nintendo. I told myself it made sense. I told myself I was grieving and Bettina was better positioned. I told myself I would visit every few weeks and everything would be fine. And then I moved into the same building as Bettina 8 months later, not because of Marcus, but because the rent on my old apartment went up and Bettina had told me there was a vacancy 2 floors below her, a good deal quiet building close to the county office. I took it without thinking hard about what it would mean to be nearby. What it meant, as it turned out, was that I had no excuse anymore. The first time I saw Marcus in the elevator, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not thinner exactly. Just smaller. Kind of small a child gets when he has stopped expecting things to be better. He smiled at me and then looked immediately at the floor. I told myself he was shy. He had always been a little shy. I told myself I was reading into it because I missed his mother. Mrs. Pruitt knocked on my door on a Tuesday. I walked Marcus upstairs myself and knocked on Bettina's door. She answered in a silk robe with a glass of wine and the television loud behind her. She looked at Marcus and then at me and said, "I told him 6 o'clock. It's not 6 yet." I asked why he wasn't allowed in before 6. She said he tracked mud and she'd just had the carpets cleaned. I looked at Marcus's shoes, the ones that were 2 sizes too small. There was no mud on them. There was barely any sole left on them. I said nothing right then. I said I'd bring him back at 6 and I took him downstairs to my apartment and I heated up the leftover soup I'd made Sunday and I watched a 10-year-old eat 2 full bowls without once looking up from the pot, the way a person eats when they have been waiting a long time for something warm. He said Bettina mostly ordered food for herself on an app, and that the kitchen was off limits unless she said so. He said sometimes there was cereal. I asked about school, about his friends, about his teacher. He answered in the careful, flat way children answer when they've learned that the wrong answer causes problems. 5:59 I walked him back upstairs. On the way up in the elevator, he looked at the floor numbers changing and said very quietly, "Thank you, Aunt Renata." like it was something rare. Like warm soup was something he needed to thank someone for. I went back downstairs and I sat at my kitchen table and I did what I do when something doesn't add up. I wrote down everything I knew. Shoes 2 sizes too small. Jacket with a broken zipper in November. Child locked out of the apartment until 6. Kitchen off limits. Cereal sometimes. 2 bowls of soup eaten without looking up. And upstairs, a silk robe, a good wine, a freshly cleaned carpet, and a television I could hear through the ceiling. I knew about the life insurance. Claudine's policy had been modest, $62,000. Payable to Marcus as beneficiary, held in trust until he turned 21, with Bettina named as trustee. I had not thought much about it at the time because grief does that to you. It makes the paperwork feel small when it isn't. I also knew, because I had been the one to help Claudine file the original paperwork years before she died, that Marcus would have been eligible for Social Security survivor benefits after his mother passed. Claudine had worked steadily for 15 years. She'd paid into the system. The benefit would have been real, monthly, and it would have needed a representative payee to manage it for Marcus until adulthood. I sat at that table and I thought about who would have filed the payee paperwork, and how fast, and whether anyone had ever checked. I tried the reasonable way first. I always try the reasonable way first. I called Bettina the next morning and I said I wanted to take Marcus shopping for winter clothes, just the 2 of us, and that I'd cover it. I kept my voice easy. I said it like it was nothing, like an aunt wanting to spend time with her nephew. Bettina's voice did not go easy in return. She said Marcus had everything he needed and she didn't know why I was making an issue out of nothing. I said it wasn't an issue, it was just an offer. She said, "Renata, I know what you're doing." I asked what she thought I was doing. She said, "You always thought Claudine could have done better than me. Now she's gone and you want to make me look bad." I said I wasn't trying to make anyone look bad. I said I was trying to make sure a 10-year-old boy had a coat with a working zipper. She hung up. I waited 2 days and called again. This time I asked, gently and directly, whether she had filed the representative payee paperwork for Marcus's survivor benefits after Claudine died. There was a silence on the line that lasted 3 full seconds. Then Bettina said that was none of my business and that she had done everything the right way and that I should be grateful she stepped up when she did, because where was I when Marcus needed a home? She wasn't wrong that I hadn't fought for him at the time. She knew that. She had built her position on exactly that. But she had not answered my question, and people with clean accounts always answer that question. I took a week. I thought about Claudine. I thought about Marcus eating soup like it was the last soup in the world. I thought about his shoes and the mud that wasn't there and the carpet that had just been cleaned. And then I thought about the trust. $62,000 held for Marcus, managed by Bettina. A trustee has a legal obligation to keep records, to act in the beneficiary's interest, and in most states to account for the funds if a court asks them to. I was not a lawyer, but I was very, very good at knowing which professional to call. Her name was Darlene Okery, and she was a family law attorney in Delwood who had a particular reputation for cases involving financial misconduct and children. She was 50, direct, and wore her natural hair in a low bun and had no interest in theatrics. I laid out everything I had on her desk in a single manila folder. The shoes, the locked-out child, the soup, the benefit question, the trust, the silk robe, the wine, carpet. She read through it without a word, picked up her pen, and made 4 notes in the margin. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You're the one who finds what the numbers don't say, aren't you?" I told her I preferred finding what they do say. She said that was close enough. She told me what we had was the shape of something real, but that we needed the substance of it, and that a court could get us the substance if we gave it the shape. We would file a petition for an emergency review of guardianship based on welfare concerns. We would request a formal accounting of the trust and the representative payee records. We would request a home welfare assessment. She told me not to move Marcus yet and not to confront Bettina directly. She said, "You've spent your career reading documents quietly. This is not the time to become loud." I told her that was not a personality I owned. While Darlene filed, I built what I could from the outside. I didn't hack anything. I didn't trespass. I work with public records every single day, and I know what a person leaves behind when they don't think anyone is looking at the county level. Property transfer records for a lakefront cabin in Pittsfield County, filed 14 months after Claudine's death, listed Bettina Monroe as buyer. Cash transaction. No mortgage. Property value assessed at $48,000. I pulled the filing date. It was recorded exactly 11 days after the trust account would have been formally established with Bettina as sole trustee. I am not a detective. I don't have to be. I know what 11 days looks like on a timeline, and I know what a cash purchase with no mortgage looks like when the buyer is a retired school administrator on a fixed pension who has otherwise reported no significant assets in any of the 4 public documents I could legally access. I also, around this same time, started paying closer attention to Marcus on the days I saw him. I made a habit of checking in. Soup on Tuesdays. A standing invitation to come knock on my door after school if he needed anything. Slowly, the way a child does when he's been disappointed enough times to move carefully, he started to talk. He told me that Bettina went away some weekends and left him with a neighbor, a woman named Dot, who was kind but confused by children and mostly let him watch television and gave him cereal for dinner. He told me she had bought herself a new car last spring, a nice one, and that she had shown him pictures from a trip to Charleston she'd taken with her friend Veronica. He said this without accusation, the way a child reports the facts of his life, not the meaning of them. He didn't know what any of it meant. I did. I asked him once, carefully, whether anyone had ever talked to him about the money his mother had set aside for him. He looked at me with an expression I will not forget, part confusion and part something older, and said, "Aunt Bettina said the lawyers took most of it in fees." I told him that lawyers do take fees sometimes. I did not tell him what I thought had happened to the rest of it. Then came the welfare assessment. A social worker named Gail Prather visited the apartment on a Thursday afternoon when I was not there. She filed a report. I have since read it. She noted the apartment was clean and the child appeared physically healthy. She noted the refrigerator contained adequate food for the day of the visit, which told me everything I needed to know about how much notice Bettina had received. She also noted in the section on the child's social and emotional well-being that Marcus was quiet and did not volunteer information, and that when she asked him directly whether he was happy, he said yes in a way she described as rehearsed. Gail Prather had been doing welfare assessments for 11 years. She knew the difference between a child who was happy and a child who had memorized the right word. She filed the report as raising moderate concerns and recommended a follow-up visit. When Darlene received it, she called me and said, "This is exactly what I needed." She also told me that the court had issued the order for the trust accounting and that Bettina had 30 days to produce the records. Bettina called me the night she received the court order. She did not sound afraid. She sounded the way people sound when they have done something wrong and decided the best defense is to be offended. She said she couldn't believe I had gone behind her back. She said Claudine would be ashamed. She said I was trying to destroy her because I was jealous of the relationship she'd had with my sister. When she was done, I said, "Bettina, I need you to produce the accounting the court has asked for." She said she'd speak to her own lawyer. I said that was her right. She said, "You think you're so smart, Renata. You always did." I said goodnight and I hung up, and I wrote down the time and the substance of the call in the notebook I had been keeping since the Tuesday Mrs. Pruitt knocked on my door. The accounting, when it was finally produced 40 days later through her attorney, after an extension and a motion and a brief hearing in which her lawyer argued it was an invasion of Bettina's financial privacy, was a document I have thought about many times since. It was not falsified, not obviously. It was worse than falsified. It was thin. It was a trust accounting with months of gaps, entries that totaled less than the benefit amounts I could verify externally, a single line for housing listed at 3 times the actual market rent for a shared apartment, and no receipts attached for anything marked miscellaneous, which came to $11,000 across 18 months. $11,000 of miscellaneous. A forensic accountant looks at $11,000 of miscellaneous and sees a door. I took that accounting to Darlene with a 2-page memorandum I had drafted myself, showing where each line diverged from the verifiable record. She read it and said, "I'm going to bring in our own financial expert, but I want you in that courtroom." The hearing was on a gray Wednesday in February. Delwood County Family Court, 3rd floor, the room that smells like old carpet and photocopier toner. Marcus was not there. He was at school, which was where he belonged. Tina came in with her attorney, a man named Ferris who wore an expensive watch and had the look of someone accustomed to winning on technicalities. She had dressed carefully, gray blouse, pearl earrings, the look of a responsible grandmother, which was roughly the story her attorney had built. A devoted older relative who had stepped into a tragedy and given up her retirement years to raise a child nobody else had wanted. He used the phrase "nobody else had wanted," and the judge, whose name was the Honorable Carmen Delgado, wrote something down and did not look up. Darlene presented the accounting discrepancy. She called our financial expert, a woman named Simone who had audited more trust accounts than I have assessed properties, and Simone walked the court through the gap between what Marcus was owed and what had demonstrably been spent on him. She presented the Pittsfield County property record. She presented Bettina's pension documents showing no other income source that could explain a $48,000 cash purchase made 11 days after the trust was established. She presented 3 years of Marcus's school records, which showed a child who had gone from a B student to a C student in the year after his mother died, who had been flagged twice by teachers for coming to school without lunch money, who had not had a single recorded dental visit since his placement with Bettina. She presented the welfare assessment and Gail Prather's note about the word rehearsed. She presented receipts I had quietly preserved from Marcus's backpack over 3 months, nothing I had asked him to collect, just the things that fall out of a child's bag when he empties it at your table. A school pizza form he'd never filled out. A permission slip for a field trip that had never been signed and therefore never gone. A note from the school nurse from October saying Marcus had come to the office twice in 1 week complaining of hunger headaches. Bettina's attorney tried 3 angles. He argued that the property in Pittsfield was purchased with Bettina's personal savings, that she had simply failed to keep adequate records due to a lack of accounting experience, and that any shortfall in the trust was the result of administrative confusion rather than intentional misuse. He said his client had sacrificed the comfort of her retirement to care for a grieving child and that the petitioner, meaning me, had shown no interest in Marcus for the first 8 months after the placement and was now second-guessing a caregiver out of personal grievance. He didn't look at Marcus's school records when he said this. I watched Judge Delgado look at them herself. Then Darlene called me to the stand. I don't have a dramatic story of what I said. I told the truth in order. I told the court about the shoes and the soup and the locked door and the carpet that had just been cleaned. I told the court about the welfare call I'd made quietly to Gail Prather's office the week after Marcus ate 2 bowls of soup without looking up. I told the court about my background, about what I do for a living, about what a gap between stated expenses and verifiable spending looks like to someone who reads it every day. I said I was not there to send my aunt to prison. I said I was there because a 10-year-old boy was being locked out of a warm apartment in November in shoes that didn't fit, and that is where I needed to start. Then Bettina's attorney gave her the chance to speak on her own behalf, and she did. And she said the thing that I think she had been saying to herself for so long she had forgotten it wasn't true. She looked at me from across the room and said, I raised that boy when no one else would. I gave up my life. I don't know what more anyone could want from me. And then she looked at Judge Delgado and said, with the absolute confidence of someone who has never been stopped, my sister would have wanted me to be taken care of. I provided a home. What more is there? Judge Delgado set down her pen. She said, Ms. Monroe, the record before me suggests that the child was not consistently provided with adequate food, appropriate clothing, or basic medical care. It also suggests that a significant portion of the funds held in trust for that child's benefit were redirected to expenses that appear to be yours, including a real property purchase that cannot be explained by your disclosed income. This court does not operate on what family members believe they deserve. It operates on what children are owed. She said she was removing Marcus from Bettina's guardianship effective that afternoon. She was awarding emergency temporary placement to me, pending a full custody hearing within 60 days. She was referring the trust accounting to the state attorney's office for investigation into potential breach of fiduciary duty. She ordered the Pittsfield property frozen pending that review. Tina's attorney started to object and Judge Delgado held up one hand and said, "We're done here, counselor." The longest part of that day was the 2 hours between the hearing and the moment I picked up Marcus from school. I had called the school to let them know I was coming. I drove Darlene's paralegal's car because mine was in the shop and borrowed a booster cushion from Mrs. Pruitt because Marcus was still small for his age and I had not yet owned anything a child needed. Came out through the side door with his backpack on both shoulders, which is how kids wear their backpacks when they're anxious, both straps tight, nothing loose, everything held close. He saw me and stopped. I crouched down on the sidewalk so we were the same height and I said, "You're going to come stay with me for a while." He looked at me for a long moment with his mother's eyes and said, "Is it because of the headaches?" I said, "It's because you deserve more than cereal and a cold step." He didn't cry. He took one strap off his backpack casual the way a child does when something relaxes in him and he said, "Can we get soup?" We got soup. We got soup and new shoes the next morning, the right size, and a coat with a zipper that closed all the way and a backpack that wasn't fraying at the seam. I cleared my spare bedroom of the boxes I had been meaning to sort for 2 years and we put up one poster and bought a small lamp and he said it was good. He said it like someone who had learned not to expect much and was recalibrating slowly, the way a plant that has been underwater grows toward light when the window finally opens. The full custody hearing came 6 weeks later. It was less dramatic than the first. Tina attended with a different attorney, a quieter one, and said very little. The financial investigation was ongoing and her first lawyer had apparently advised her against additional statements. Marcus spoke to the judge's appointed guardian ad litem, a woman who spent 40 minutes with him in a small room with a plant and a box of colored pencils, and what that guardian wrote in her report I will keep private because it belonged to Marcus. What I will tell you is that her recommendation was clear, and the judge followed it. Permanent placement with me, subject to review. Supervised contact with Bettina suspended pending the outcome of the financial investigation. Structured therapeutic support for Marcus to be funded partly from the trust assets that could be recovered and partly from a county assistance program Darlene had identified. The financial investigation took 8 more months. I will not walk you through all of it because parts of it are still formally ongoing and because some of it is Marcus's story to tell when he is older. What I can tell you is that the Pittsfield property was sold under court supervision and the proceeds were returned to the trust. That a portion of the monthly benefit funds were determined to have been spent on personal expenses including a vehicle lease, a home renovation, and 4 separate travel bookings. That the total amount unaccounted for in Marcus's trust when the final reconciliation was filed was $61,400, which is to say nearly the entirety of what Claudine had left for her son. That Bettina was required under a civil settlement to repay what could be recovered on a schedule and was placed on a list that made her permanently ineligible to serve as a financial guardian or representative payee for any child in this state. That she did not go to prison. I had not asked for prison. I had asked for the money back and for Marcus to have what his mother meant for him to have, and the law did what the law does when the documents are clean and the record is clear. I do not hate Bettina. I have thought about this carefully because I think it matters to say it honestly. She took a child when she could have said no. There was a version of her that might have done this right. But she looked at a trust account and a monthly check and a grieving retired woman's quiet life and she decided that the child's needs were smaller than her own comfort, and she told herself a story about sacrifice until the story became the whole truth she lived by. I have audited people who do this with company money. It is the same mechanism. The story grows to fit the gap until the person inside it can no longer see the gap at all. That doesn't make it forgivable. It makes it human in the worst possible sense. And it makes the document trail more important, not less, because the document trail does not tell itself stories. Marcus is 12 now. He is back to being a B student, nearly an A student in English, which was his mother's subject too. He has a dentist. He has a coat that fits and 3 more waiting in the closet because I tend to over-prepare. He has a phone with my number and his counselor's number and the number of his best friend Joel saved under the contact name Joel Soccer. He raids my refrigerator without asking because I told him a year ago that he never had to ask, and I could see in his face the exact moment he believed me. He doesn't hide food anymore. That took the longest. But the hiding stopped. Tina sends a card at Christmas. I read them. I don't write back, but I haven't thrown them away either. When Marcus is grown, he can decide what he wants to do with that door. Some doors belong to the child, not the adult, and I have learned to leave those ones alone. Claudine didn't know I would be here for this. She didn't plan it that way. She put a trust in place and a beneficiary and a name she thought she could count on, and she was wrong and she couldn't have known. But the paper trail she left by working her whole life and paying into a system that was supposed to protect her boy turned out to be the thing that got him back. I just knew how to read it. That is my story. A child locked out in the cold. A bowl of soup and a wrong-sized shoe, and a woman who finds what doesn't add up and follows it until it does. If this reminded you that a document and a quiet witness and one adult who refuses to look away can change the whole direction of a child's life, let that be your sign to check on the kid nobody else is checking on. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.